Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world so gritty, so unrelentingly harsh, you'll be kissing your cozy blanket by the end. Picture yourself trudging through a muddy medieval village, the air thick with the stench of manure and unwashed bodies. Chickens cluck underfoot, and a distant blacksmith's hammer clangs like a headache you can't shake. You're not a knight or a king. You're just you, dropped into the Middle Ages, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. The odds are stacked against you, from the moment you wake to the moment you collapse on a straw mat, hoping tomorrow isn't worse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love picturing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up at dawn, not because you're an early bird, but because a rooster's scream pierces your eardrums. Your bed? A lumpy sack of straw that smells like it's been shared with a family of rats. You're in a medieval village somewhere in Europe, maybe 12th century England or France. The exact year doesn't matter. Life's been this rough for centuries. You're a peasant because, let's be honest, 90% of people were. Your day starts with a splash of cold, questionable water from a bucket. No coffee, no toothbrush, just a quick prayer you don't die today. Historians estimate 80% of medieval folk lived hand to mouth, toiling for lords who barely knew their names. That's you now, bound to a manor, your life dictated by the seasons and a noble's whims. First task, you stumble outside to tend the fields. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are thin leather scraps, already soaked from last night's rain. The mud sucks at your feet, and you're pretty sure something just crawled up your leg. You got a wooden hoe, blunt from years of use, and you're expected to break the soil for planting. It's backbreaking, and the sun's barely up. A quirky tidbit: some peasants believed burying a toad in the field would boost crops. Good luck finding a toad when you're starving. You glance at the other serfs, their faces etched with exhaustion, and wonder if they've tried the toad trick. Historians still argue whether these rituals were desperate superstition or held some practical root, like toads eating pests. The village around you is alive, but not in a cute, Renaissance fair way. It's chaos. Kids run barefoot, chasing a pig that's escaped its pen. A woman screams at a neighbor for stealing her turn at the communal oven. That oven, by the way, is your only shot at bread, and you'll pay a fee to the Lord to use it. Money's scarce. Most of your payment is labor or a chunk of your meager harvest. You're not free to leave this manor either. Serfs are tied to the land, legally bound. Want to run? Good luck. The forest's full of wolves, and the Lord's men have dogs. A modern aside, imagine trying to explain your 9 to 5 desk job to these folks. They'd think you're a wizard or just lazy. By noon, your stomach's growling, but lunch is a fantasy. You might snag a hunk of rye bread, maybe some pottage, a watery stew of oats, and whatever herbs you scrounged. It's bland, and you're still hungry. A quick joke: why did the medieval peasant bring a ladder to the field? Because he heard the crops were out of reach. You'd laugh, but your back hurts too much. You're not alone in this misery. Everyone's scraping by. The village is small, maybe 200 souls, and everyone knows everyone's business. Gossip's the only entertainment, unless you count the occasional traveling minstrel who's probably overcharging for a lute song. Let's talk hygiene, or the lack of it. You're filthy. Bathing's a luxury, maybe once a month if you're fancy. Most folks think too much water weakens you. Seriously, that was a thing. You've got no soap, just a rough cloth to scrub the worst of the grime. Your clothes? One set, maybe 2 if you're lucky, and their wool itchy and crawling with fleas. You're scratching as you work, and you're not alone. Everyone's got bites. A quirky fact: some medieval folks thought fleas were a punishment from God, so they'd pray instead of, washing. You're starting to see why disease spreads like wildfire here. The day drags on. You're in the fields until dusk, your hands blistered, your shoulders screaming. The Lord's overseer rides by, eyeing your work like you're a machine. You're not. You're human, barely holding it together. If you slack off, you might get a whipping or lose what little food you've got. The manor's not just your workplace. It's your whole world. Church, fields, hut. That's it. No weekends, no vacations. Your only break is a saint's day, and even then, you're expected to pray, not party. Speaking of prayer, the church bells ring, calling you to vespers. You trudge over, not because you're pious, but because skipping means trouble. The priest glares like he knows you're thinking about that stale bread waiting at home. As the sun sets, you're bone-tired. You stumble back to your hut, ducking under the low doorway. Inside, it's dark, smoky, and cold. You share this space with your family, maybe a cow if you're lucky enough to own one. No privacy, no comfort. You collapse onto your straw mat, the same one you woke up on, and pull a thin blanket over you. The fleas are already biting. You close your eyes, praying tomorrow's not worse. A final joke: why don't medieval peasants play chess? Because the only move they know is checkmate by the Lord. You're not laughing. You're too tired. This is day one, and you're already wondering how anyone survived this life. You wake to the same rooster's screech, your body aching like you've been trampled by a horse. No snooze button, no coffee, just the cold reality of another day as a medieval peasant. You're still in that muddy village, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and livestock. Your straw mat feels lumpier, and you're pretty sure a rat scurried over your feet last night. You pull yourself up, splash your face with water that's suspiciously cloudy, and step outside. The fields are calling, and there's no escaping them. Today, like yesterday, you're bound to the land, a serf whose life revolves around pleasing a lord you've barely seen. Your job? Toil. All day. Every day. You grab your worn hoe and head to the fields, the mud sucking at your tattered shoes. The work never changes: plowing, planting, or weeding, depending on the season. Right now, it's spring, so you're breaking soil for barley or oats. Your back screams with every swing of the hoe, and the blisters from yesterday have popped, leaving raw skin. Historians note that peasants work 12-hour days, sometimes more, with breaks only for a quick meal or church. Your Lord owns these fields, and you owe him most of your crop, maybe 50% or more depending on his mood. What's left barely feeds you and your family. The sun climbs, and sweat stings your eyes. You glance at the other peasants, their faces grim as they hack at the earth. A woman nearby mutters about a bad omen. A crow landed on her roof. Superstition's rampant, and you're starting to get why. When life's this brutal, you cling to anything that explains the misery. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some peasants scattered ashes from burned pig bones over fields, believing it'd ward off evil spirits. You're tempted to try it, but you'd rather eat the pig. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely spiritual or tied to practical benefits, like ash enriching the soil. By noon, you're starving. Lunch is a crust of rye bread, so hard you have to soak it in ale to chew it. The ale's weak, more like fermented water, but it's safer than the stream nearby, which doubles as the village's toilet. You sit on a stump, swatting flies, and overhear two men arguing about whose turn it is to repair the Lord's fence. Nobody wants extra work, unpaid, of course. A modern aside, Imagine telling these folks about your grocery delivery app. They'd think you're royalty, or maybe possessed. You'd kill for a burger right now, but the closest you get is dreaming about the Lord's leftovers. The afternoon drags. You're weeding now, pulling thorny plants that slice your hands. The overseer rides by, his horse kicking up mud that splatters your face. He doesn't care about your name, just your output. If you fall behind, you might lose your strip of land, your only shot at survival. The feudal system's no joke. Records show 80 to 90% of medieval Europeans were peasants, most tied to manners like this one. You're not just working for food, you're working to exist. A quick joke. Why did the peasant plant his crops in a circle? He thought it'd confuse the tax collector. You wish it were that easy. Let's talk about downtime, because there's barely any. When you're not in the fields, you're fixing tools, hauling water, or helping a neighbor mend their roof. Everything's communal, but not in a warm, fuzzy way. It's survival. If you don't pitch in, the village shuns you, and good luck surviving winter alone. You're starting to notice the smells. Unwashed bodies, animal dung, and smoke from hearth fires. Your clothes are stiff with dirt, and you're itching again. Fleas are your new best friends, and you're not laughing. Another quirky fact. Some peasants wore charms made of dried herbs to repel bugs. Spoiler, they didn't work. You're scratching as you work, wondering if you'll ever feel clean again. As evening falls, the church bells ring for vespers. You trudge to the tiny stone church, its walls damp and mossy. The priest drones in Latin, and you're supposed to pray, but you're too tired to focus. Skipping church isn't an option. Gossip spreads fast, and the priest might accuse you of heresy. That's a one-way ticket to trouble, maybe even a whipping. You kneel on the cold floor, your knees aching, and try to look devout. A joke to lighten the mood. Why don't peasants skip church? Because the devil's already got their landlord. You smirk, but the priest's glare shuts you up. Back at your hut, you collapse onto your straw mat. The fire's low, and the smoke stings your eyes, but it's the only warmth you've got. Your family's there, maybe a spouse, a kid or two, all crammed into this tiny space. You share a bowl of pottage, thin and tasteless, and try not to think about tomorrow. The field will still be there. The Lord's demands won't change, and the mud's only getting deeper. You pull your thin blanket tighter, the fleas already nibbling. Sleep's your only escape, but even that's haunted by the ache in your bones. You're starting to see why nobody in this village smiles. You're jolted awake by that cursed rooster again, your body protesting as you roll off the straw mat. The air in your hut is thick with smoke and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. You step outside, and the village assaults your senses. The stench of open sewers hits like a punch. Muck clings to your shoes, a mix of human waste, animal dung, and whatever else the rain churned up. You're in the same medieval village, still a serf, and today you're learning the hard way why hygiene, or the lack of it, made medieval life a gamble. You're wading through filth, and disease is lurking like an uninvited guest. Good luck surviving this one. You trudge toward the fields, but first you pass the village's central ditch, its version of a sewer. It's an open trench, overflowing with waste that spills onto the path. You hold your breath, but there's no escaping the smell. Everyone uses this ditch. Privies are rare, and even the Lord's castle dumps its slop nearby. Historical records show medieval towns often lacked proper sanitation, with waste piling up in streets or flowing into rivers used for drinking. You're starting to understand why people died young. Half the population didn't make it past 30. You splash through a puddle, then realize it's not just water. Gross. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed bad smells cause disease, so they'd carry pouches of herbs to sniff, thinking it'd protect them. You try holding your sleeve to your nose, but it's just as rank as the air. Historians still argue whether these miasma beliefs delayed sanitation progress or if people just had no better options. Either way, you're not feeling optimistic as you dodge another pile of who knows what. You're itching again. Those fleas from your hut followed you, and now you're wondering what else is crawling on you. By mid-morning, you're back in the fields, hoe in hand, but the air's buzzing with flies. They're everywhere, drawn to the filth. You swat them away, but it's useless. Your stomach churns, not just from hunger, but from the thought of what's in the water you drank earlier. The stream's downstream from the sewer ditch, and nobody boils water here. They don't know they should. A modern aside, imagine explaining germs to these folks. They'd think you're a witch, and you'd be running from a mob. You'd kill for a bottle of hand sanitizer, but all you've got is a rag that's dirtier than your hands. Then there's disease. The Black Death might be a century away, but smaller plagues, dysentery, typhoid, cholera, are constant threats. You notice a neighbor coughing, his face pale and sweaty. He's still working because stopping means starving. You keep your distance, but there's no real escape. Villages like this were breeding grounds for illness. Records suggest up to 20% of a village could die in a bad outbreak. A joke to lighten the mood. Why don't peasants get sick days? Because the plague doesn't take holidays. You're not laughing. Your neighbor's cough sounds wetter now, and you're praying it's not contagious. By afternoon, you're parched. You head to the stream, knowing it's a risk. The water's murky, with bits of something floating in it. You drink anyway. There's no choice. Your throat's dry, and the ale's reserved for dinner. You're starting to feel queasy, and it's not just the water. The village is a petri dish. Kids play near the sewer ditch, barefoot and oblivious. A woman dumps a bucket of slop into it, splashing your leg. You're beyond disgusted, but nobody else blinks. This is normal. Another quirky fact. Some peasants thought bathing in urine could cure infections. You're not desperate enough to try that yet. The church bells ring, pulling you from the fields to vespers. The church is no cleaner than the village. The floor's packed dirt, and the air's damp. The priest's sermon warns of God's wrath, blaming disease on sin. You're too tired to argue, but you're starting to think the real sin is whoever designed this sewer system. A quick joke. Why did the peasant avoid the priest? He didn't want a sermon on his flea-bitten soul. You smirk, but the priest's glare makes you kneel faster. Skipping church could land you in the stocks, and you've got enough problems. As evening falls, you're back in your hut, the smoke from the fire stinging your eyes. Your family's there, crammed into the tiny space, and you notice your kids scratching too. Fleas again, or worse. You try not to think about it. Dinner's the usual pottage, but you're wary of the water used to make it. You eat slowly, your stomach uneasy. The village's filth is inescapable, and you're starting to feel like you're one bad drink from joining your coughing neighbor. You collapse onto your straw mat, the fleas already nibbling. Sleep's your only break, but even that feels risky. You're wondering how anyone survived this cesspool of a life. The rooster's crow rips you from sleep, your body stiff from another night on that lumpy straw mat. You're still in this grimy medieval village, the air heavy with the stench of manure and last night's cooking fires. You stumble outside, dodging the ever-present mud, and realize today's no break from the grind. Your stomach's already growling, and you're about to discover why medieval diets were a special kind of torture. You're not grabbing a smoothie or even a stale donut. You're stuck with whatever scraps this village calls food. Spoiler, it's not Instagram worthy, and it might just make you gag. You head to the communal hearth, where your family's already stirring a pot of pottage over a smoky fire. It's the same watery slop as yesterday. Oats, maybe some wilted greens, and a suspicious lump you hope is just a turnip. You grab a wooden bowl, its edges worn and splintered, and scoop out your share. The texture's like glue, and the taste? Imagine cardboard soaked in ditch water. Historical records show peasants relied on pottage and coarse bread, often made from rye or barley, because wheat was for the rich. Your daily calorie intake's barely 1,500, enough to keep you alive, not thriving. You chew slowly, try not to notice the moldy flecks in the bread. It's stale, baked days ago in the Lord's oven, which you paid a fee to use. Starvation was a real threat. Famines hit hard, and one bad harvest could wipe out half the village. You're lucky it's spring. Food scarce, but not winter-level desperate. A quirky tidbit. Some peasants ate famine foods like tree bark or nettles when crops failed. You're eyeing the weeds outside, wondering if they're edible. Historians still argue whether these desperate diets were survival genius or just slow poison, as some plants were toxic. By mid-morning, you're back in the fields, hoe in hand, your stomach still rumbling. The pottage didn't fill you, and the ale, weak, sour stuff, is all you've got to wash it down. Ale's safer than water, but it's no craft beer. It's cloudy, tastes like regret, and you're drinking it warm. A modern aside, imagine telling these folks about your fridge stocked with snacks. They'd think you're a king, or maybe a sorcerer. You'd trade your soul for a vending machine right now, but all you've got is a crust of bread you stuffed in your pocket. It's already attracting ants. Lunch is a repeat. More pottage, maybe a raw onion if you're lucky. You sit on a rock, swatting flies, and watch a kid chase a scrawny chicken. Meets a pipe dream. Animals are too valuable to eat unless they're old or sick. You might get pork at a feast, but that's months away. A quick joke. Why did the peasant bring a spoon to the field? Because he heard the crops were stupendous. You're not laughing. Your teeth hurt from chewing gritty bread, and you're pretty sure something's stuck in there. Dental care? Non-existent. You're one bad toothache from yanking it out with a rusty tool. The afternoon's no better. You're weeding, your hands raw from thorns, and your stomach's still complaining. You overhear two women arguing about who gets the last of the village's dried peas. Food's not just scarce, it's a status symbol. The Lord eats white bread and venison. You get scraps and envy. Another quirky fact. Some peasants believed eating garlic warded off evil spirits. You're tempted to try it, if only to keep the flies away. Your breath's already bad, so why not? You're starting to notice everyone's thin, their cheeks hollow. Malnutrition's a way of life here, and you're feeling it in your bones. Church bells ring, dragging you to Vespers. The priest's sermon drones on about gluttony, and you almost snort. Gluttony's not your problem. You're kneeling on the cold church floor, dreaming of a second bowl of pottage. A second joke. Why don't peasants overeat? Because the Lord's table's the only one with seconds. You stifle a grin, but the priest's glare keeps you in line. Skipping church means gossip, and gossip means trouble. You're too hungry to care much, but you bow your head and fake it. Back at your hut, night's falling and the fire's low. Your family huddles around, sharing the last of today's pottage. You notice your kid's portion is smaller. They're growing, but there's not enough to go around. You give them half your share, ignoring the pang in your gut. The ale's gone, so you sip water from the bucket, praying it's not tainted. You collapse onto your straw mat, the fleas already biting. Sleep's your only escape, but your stomach's growling keeps you awake. You're starting to see why medieval peasants dreamed of feasts they'd never taste. That rooster's crow hits you like a slap, dragging you from a restless sleep on your straw mat, which now feels like a pile of rocks. The air in your hut is thick with smoke and the musty smell of damp wool. You're still in this medieval village, your body aching, your stomach growling from last night's measly pottage. You step outside, the cold biting through your thin tunic, and realize today's about where you live, or rather, where you barely survive. Your home's a cramped, smoky hut, and it's about as cozy as a wet sock. You're about to learn why medieval living conditions would make your modern apartment feel like a palace. You duck back into your hut, a low, wattle-and-daub structure with walls of mud and straw. It's maybe 15 feet by 10, shared with your family, and, if you're lucky, a cow for warmth. The floor is packed dirt, damp from leaks in the thatched roof. There's one tiny window, no glass, just a wooden shutter that lets in drafts and bugs. Historical records show most peasant homes were like this, small, dark, and barely standing. You're shivering already, and it's not even winter. The fire in the center, your only heat source, belches smoke that stings your eyes and coats your lungs. Chimneys? Those are for lords, not you. You try to light the fire, but the wood's damp and the smoke's choking you. A quirky tidbit. Some peasants believed sleeping near the fire kept evil spirits away, so you're all crammed close, coughing together. Historians still argue whether this was pure superstition or a way to justify huddling for warmth. Either way, you're not feeling spiritual, you're just cold. You notice the fleas again, hopping on your blanket. They're everywhere, and you're scratching raw spots into your skin. A modern aside, imagine explaining a vacuum cleaner to these folks. They'd think it's magic, and you'd trade your left arm for one right now. By morning, you're tasked with patching the roof. You climb up, balancing on rickety beams, and shove fresh straw into the holes. It's a losing battle. Rain seeps in, and the thatch is crawling with bugs. Your neighbor's hut collapsed last month, and nobody's surprised. These places aren't built to last. You're covered in mud and straw bits, and your hands are scratched from the rough thatch. A quick joke. Why don't peasants redecorate? Because the rats like the minimalist vibe. You're not laughing. The roof's leaking on your face, and you're praying it holds until summer. Inside, privacy's a myth. Your family's always there, plus the occasional chicken that wanders in. You share one room for sleeping, eating, and everything else. The cow, if you've got one, farts in the corner, adding to the ambience. You're starting to smell like the hut. Smoke, sweat, and something you can't identify. Another quirky fact. Some peasants hung dried herbs to freshen the air. Spoiler, it's like spraying perfume in a landfill. You're desperate for a breeze, but opening the shutter lets in more flies. Your head's pounding from the smoke, and you're wondering how anyone breathes in here. By afternoon, you're back in the fields, but your hut's on your mind. You're dreading another night in that damp, smoky box. The village is full of huts like yours, some worse, leaning, patched with whatever's handy. The Lord's Manor, up on the hill, has stone walls and actual windows. You're not invited. A second joke. Why is the peasant's hut so small? So the Lord can tax every square inch. You smirk, but the truth stings. You're taxed for the land your hut sits on, paid in grain or labor. You're barely scraping by. Church bells call you to vespers, and you trudge to the stone church, its walls cold and damp. The priest's preaching about humility, but you're distracted by a new itch, probably lice this time. You're kneeling on the dirt floor, trying not to cough from the smoke, still clinging to your clothes. Skipping church could mean a fine or worse, so you endure it. Back at your hut, night's falling and the fire's barely going. You huddle with your family, sharing a thin blanket. Dinner's the usual pottage, eaten in the dark. You collapse onto your mat, the fleas waiting. Sleep's your only escape, but the cold and smoke make it a faint hope. You're starting to see why medieval peasants aged fast, if they survived at all. The rooster screech yanks you from shallow sleep, your body stiff from another night on that straw mat, now damp from a leak you didn't fix. You're still in this filthy medieval village, the air thick with smoke and the faint reek of yesterday's slop. You stumble outside, the mud grabbing your shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's lesson is brutal. Justice in the Middle Ages is less about fairness and more about survival. You're about to learn why one wrong move could land you in a world of pain, or worse. Step carefully, because the rules here are as unforgiving as the mud. You head to the fields, your host slung over your shoulder, but there's a commotion near the village square. A crowd's gathered around the stocks, where a man's locked in, his head and hands trapped in wooden beams. He stole a loaf of bread. Hunger makes thieves of everyone, and now he's paying. People jeer, tossing rotten vegetables. Historical records show theft, even petty theft, could mean public humiliation or worse, a hand chopped off, a flogging, or hanging for repeat offenders. You're hungry too, but you keep your head down. One slip, and that's you in the stocks. You're weeding when you overhear gossip. A woman's been accused of poaching the Lord's rabbits. She's facing the manor court, a kangaroo court run by the Lord's men. Justice isn't blind here, it's loyal to power. A quirky tidbit: some villages use trial by ordeal, like dunking suspects in water to see if they floated guilty or sank, innocent but possibly drowned. Historians still argue whether these trials were genuine belief in divine judgment or just a way to scare people into compliance. You're not keen to find out, but you're sweating just thinking about it. Stealing a rabbit sounds tempting, but not if it costs your life. By noon, your stomach's gnawing, but you're distracted by a new fear. The Lord's bailiff is prowling. He's checking who's working and who's not. Slack off, and you're fined. Grain you can't spare. Worse, you could be accused of something vague like disturbing the peace. A modern aside, imagine explaining innocent until proven guilty to these folks. They'd laugh, or maybe lock you up for sounding like a heretic. You'd love a lawyer right now, but the closest thing is the village gossip, and she's not on your side. You keep your head down, hoeing faster. The afternoon brings more trouble. A neighbor's been caught hiding crops to dodge the Lord's tithe. He's dragged to the manor, where he'll face a fine or a whipping. You've been tempted to hide a few bushels yourself. Everyone's starving, but the risk is too high. Punishments are public, designed to terrify. A quick joke: why don't peasants play hide and seek? Because the Lord's bailiff always wins. You're not laughing. You're checking your own grain sack, praying nobody saw you take an extra handful. The crowd at the whipping cheers, and you're sickened, but you can't look away. Fear keeps this village in line. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the church, its damp walls offering no comfort. The priest's sermon is about obedience, and you feel the weight of his words. Disobey, and you're not just a criminal, you're a sinner. Heresy's the worst crime. A whispered doubt about the church could get you burned. Another quirky fact: some accused witches were tested by weighing them against a Bible. If they were heavier, they were guilty. You're starting to see why nobody speaks up. A second joke: why is the peasant's trial so short? Because the Lord's gavel's heavier than the evidence. You stifle a smirk, but the priest's glare keeps you quiet. Back at your hut, night's falling and the fire's barely alive. Your family's tense. Gossip about the whipped neighbor spreading. You eat your pottage in silence. The taste is grim as your mood. You're starting to notice everyone's watching everyone else, ready to snitch to save themselves. The stocks, the whip, the noose, they're not just punishments, they're warnings. You collapse onto your straw mat, the fleas biting as always. Sleep's your only escape, but nightmares of the stocks creep in. You're starting to see why medieval justice wasn't about fairness. It was about control, and you're barely hanging on. That rooster's crow slices through the fog of sleep, yanking you from your straw mat, which feels more like a torture device now. You're still stuck in this grimy medieval village, the air heavy with the stink of damp straw and last night's pottage. Your body aches, your stomach's a knot, and the fleas are having a party on your skin. Today's no break from the grind. You're about to learn why superstition ruled medieval life like an iron fist. Every shadow, every crow, every stubbed toe could be a sign of divine wrath, or worse, a witch's curse. You're walking on eggshells, and the eggs are probably cursed too. You stumble outside, dodging the usual mud, and notice a neighbor tying a red string around her door. She mutters about warding off evil spirits. Superstition's not just a quirk here, it's survival. People believed everything from storms to sick cows was caused by supernatural forces. Historical records show that by the 13th century, the church encouraged these beliefs to keep control, blaming misfortune on sin or witchcraft. You're skeptical, but when a black cat crosses your path, your heart skips. You're not taking chances. Yesterday's whipping in the village square is still fresh in your mind. You're in the fields, hacking at weeds, when a crow lands nearby. The other peasants freeze, whispering about bad omens. A quirky tidbit. Some believe a crow on your roof meant death was coming, so they'd throw stones to scare it off. You're tempted to chuck a rock, but you're too tired. Historians still argue whether these omens were pure fear or a way to explain a brutal world with no science. Either way, you're spooked, and the crow's staring like it knows something. You keep working, but every rustle in the bushes feels like a warning. By noon, your stomach's growling, but you're distracted by gossip. A woman's been accused of witchcraft for selling herbs. She's facing the manor court, and the village is buzzing. Witch hunts weren't at their peak yet, but even now, a bad rumor could get you drowned or burned. A modern aside, imagine trying to explain innocent until proven guilty to a mob with pitchforks. They'd think you're hexed. You'd kill for a Wi-Fi signal to Google how to not look like a witch, but all you've got is a hoe and a growing sense of dread. You avoid the herb woman's gaze as you pass her hut. The afternoon's tense. You're weeding, but everyone's whispering about signs: spilled ale, a cracked egg, a child's fever. Superstition's a language here, and you're learning fast. If your cow dies, it's not sickness, it's a curse. If you trip, someone's hexed you. A quick joke. Why don't peasants trust mirrors? They're afraid their reflections plotting against them. You're not laughing. You're checking your shadow to make sure it's still yours. Another quirky fact. Some wore amulets made of hare's feet for luck. You're considering it, but the only hair you've seen belongs to the Lord, and poaching's a death sentence. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the church, its damp stone walls closing in. The priest's sermon is all fire and brimstone, warning of devils and witches hiding among you. You're kneeling, but your mind's on that crow from earlier. Was it just a bird or something worse? The church fuels these fears, calling doubt a sin. A second joke. Why is the peasant's prayer so short? because the devil's already got his schedule. You stifle a smirk, but the priest's glare pins you. Skipping church could mark you as a heretic, and that's a one-way ticket to a stake. Back at your hut, night's falling and the fire's barely flickering. Your family's quiet, eyeing the door like something's coming. You eat your pottage, but every creak makes you jump. The village is alive with whispers. Someone saw a strange light in the woods. A curse? A ghost? You don't know, but you're pulling your blanket tighter. The fleas are biting, but they're the least of your worries. Sleep's your only escape, but it's haunted by dreams of crows and accusing eyes. You're starting to see why superstition gripped these people. When life's this unpredictable, you'll believe anything to feel in control. The rooster's crow stabs through the dark, hauling you off your straw mat, which now feels like a bed of nails. You're still trapped in this reeking medieval village, the air thick with smoke and the sour tang of damp earth. Your body's a map of aches, and the fleas are throwing a festival on your skin. You stumble outside, the mud clutching your shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's a grim one. You're about to face the nightmare of medieval medicine. A toothache, a fever, or even a cut could send you to an early grave, and the cures might be worse than the disease. Good luck keeping your breakfast down. You're heading to the fields when a sharp pain stabs your jaw. That gritty bread from yesterday's done a number on your teeth, and now one's throbbing. You'd love a dentist, but here, it's the village barber or nothing. Historical records show barbers doubled as surgeons, hacking off limbs or pulling teeth with tools that look like torture devices. You trudge to the barber's hut, where he's sharpening a rusty blade over a fire. He offers you a swig of ale to dull the pain, then grabs pliers. You're sweating, and not just from the heat. He yanks the tooth, and you see stars. Hygiene's not a thing here, and that blade's been used on who knows what. The pain's worse now, and you're spitting blood into the dirt. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval doctors used leeches to balance your humors, believing illness came from too much blood or bile. You're offered a jar of slimy leeches for your swollen jaw, and you're not sure if it's a cure or a prank. Historians still argue whether humor-based medicine was pure quackery or if some remedies, like herbal poultices, had real benefits. Either way, you're not signing up for leeches. You'd rather chew willow bark and pray. A modern aside, imagine explaining antibiotics to these folks. They'd think you're a wizard, and you'd be running from a witch hunt. By noon, you're back in the fields, your jaw throbbing with every swing of the hoe. You're lightheaded, maybe from blood loss, maybe from hunger. The village is buzzing with talk of a sick kid, fever, rash, the works. The local healer, an old woman with a sack of herbs, is muttering about bad air and offering a paste of crushed snails. You're skeptical, but nobody knows about germs. Another quirky fact. Some believed wearing a dead toad around your neck could cure fever. You're not that desperate yet, but the kid's parents are nodding like it's gospel. You keep your distance, remembering that coughing neighbor from a few days ago. The afternoon's a blur of pain and work. Your jaw's swelling, and you're starting to worry about infection. Medical knowledge is a patchwork of folklore and guesswork. If you're lucky, the healer's herbs might help. If not, you're done for. Records suggest up to 50% of medieval surgeries ended in death from infection or shock. A quick joke. Why don't peasants trust doctors? Because the cure's worse than the coffin. You're not laughing. Your tooth's socket feels hot, and you're praying it's not spreading. You're weeding, but every move's a struggle, and the overseer's watching like a hawk. Church bells ring for vespers, and you limp to the church, your jaw pulsing. The priest's sermon is about suffering as God's will, and you're tempted to roll your eyes, but that'd mark you as trouble. You kneel, wincing, and try to focus on anything but the pain. A second joke. Why is the peasant's doctor so busy? Because misery's his best customer. You stifle a grimace, but the priest's glare keeps you in line. Skipping church could get you labeled a heretic, and you've got enough problems with your maybe infected jaw. Back at your hut, night's falling, and the fire's barely alive. Your family's worried, eyeing your swollen face. You try to eat pottage, but chewing's agony. The healer's snail paste is starting to sound less crazy. You sip ale, hoping it'll numb something, but it just tastes like despair. The fleas are biting, and your jaw's throbbing in time with your heartbeat. Sleep's your only hope, but it's fitful, haunted by dreams of rusty pliers and leech jars. You're starting to see why medieval medicine was a roll of the dice, and the dice were loaded against you. The rooster's crow jars you awake, your jaw still throbbing from yesterday's tooth-pulling disaster. You're in the same reeking medieval village, the air heavy with smoke and the sour stench of mud. Your straw mat feels like a sack of stones, and the fleas are relentless, turning your skin into their personal buffet. You stumble outside, the cold biting through your tattered tunic, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's no respite. You're about to face the constant shadow of warfare. Raiders, conscription, or a stray arrow could end you, and your village is never truly safe. You're learning fast that peace is a luxury you can't afford. You head to the fields, your hoe a familiar weight, but there's tension in the air. A rider galloped through at dawn, shouting about bandits spotted nearby. The village is on edge. Everyone's heard stories of entire hamlets burned to the ground. Historical records show that medieval Europe was a patchwork of feuds, with local lords fighting over land and peasants caught in the crossfire. You're not a soldier, but that doesn't mean you're safe. If the Lord calls, you're conscripted, handed a rusty spear, and sent to die for a cause you don't understand. You're weeding when you hear a distant horn. Everyone freezes, eyes scanning the horizon. False alarm, just a merchant's cart, but your heart's pounding. A quirky tidbit. Some villages kept war pigs, slathered in pitch, and set ablaze to scare enemy horses. You're not sure if that's genius or horrifying, but you're hoping it never comes to that. Historians still argue whether such tactics were common or just tall tales spun by desperate peasants. Either way, you're gripping your hoe a little tighter, wondering if it'd double as a weapon. Spoiler, it wouldn't. By noon, your stomach's growling, but talk of bandits has everyone distracted. You chew your stale bread, swatting flies, and overhear the men debating whether to hide their grain. Raiders don't just kill, they steal food, leaving you to starve. A modern aside, imagine explaining a security system to these folks. They'd think your Ring doorbell is witchcraft, and you'd trade your soul for one now. You're scanning the tree lean, half expecting a war band to burst out. A quick joke? Why don't peasants join the army? Because they're already fighting a war against hunger. You're not laughing. Your jaw's still sore, and fear's a heavy weight. The afternoon brings more work, but the village is preparing. Some men sharpen sticks, others hide tools that could be looted. You're told to help fortify the palisade, a rickety wooden fence that wouldn't stop a determined cow. Warfare's not just battles, it's a way of life. Records suggest villages like yours were raided yearly, especially during harvest season. If you're conscripted, you'll march with no training, maybe barefoot, against men who've killed for a living. You're starting to understand why everyone prays so hard. God's your only backup plan. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the church, its damp walls offering no comfort. The priest's sermon is about holy wars, urging you to fight for faith if called. You're kneeling, but your mind's on the bandits. Another quirky fact: some believed wearing a saint's relic could protect you in battle. You're tempted to sew a pebble into your tunic and call it holy, but you're too tired to try. A second joke: why is the peasant's armor so thin? Because the Lord saves the good stuff for his horse. You stifle a smirk, but the priest's glare keeps you quiet. Skipping church could mark you as a coward or worse. Back at your hut, night's falling, and the fire's barely alive. Your family's tense, whispering about the bandit rumors. You eat your pottage in silence, every creak making you jump. The village is quiet, too quiet, and you're wondering if you should sleep with your home nearby. The fleas are biting, but they're nothing compared to the fear of a raid. Sleep's your only escape, but it's fitful, haunted by dreams of fire and screams. You're starting to see why warfare wasn't just a threat. It was a shadow over every day, and you're barely holding on. That rooster's crow rips you from a jittery sleep, your heart still racing from dreams of bandits and burning villages. You're still in this foul-smelling medieval hamlet, the air thick with smoke and the stench of damp straw. Your straw mat is a cruel joke, lumpy and crawling with fleas that never quit. You stumble outside, the mud sucking at your worn shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's lesson is heavy. The church's grip on your life is tighter than the Lord's. From tithes to sermons, it's a force you can't escape, and one wrong word could brand you a heretic. You're about to learn why faith wasn't just belief, it was survival. You head to the fields, your hoe dragging behind, but your mind's on the tithe. The church demands 10% of your crops, on top of the Lord's cut, and they're not flexible. Historical records show tithes were non-negotiable, often collected in grain or livestock, leaving peasants like you scraping by. You're already hungry, and giving up that barley feels like giving up your kid's next meal. You're tempted to hide a sack, but the priest's men are sharp-eyed, and getting caught means a fine, or worse, a public shaming. You're starting to resent those church bells. By mid-morning, you're weeding, but the village is buzzing about a man who skipped last week's mass. He's been summoned to the church court, and whispers of heresy are spreading. A quirky tidbit: some believed missing church could curse your crops, so neighbors are avoiding him like he's plague-ridden. Historians still argue whether these fears were church propaganda or genuine peasant belief, but either way, you're not risking it. You're at every service, knees sore from kneeling. A modern aside: imagine explaining atheism to these folks. They'd think you're possessed, and you'd be running from a mob. You'd love a day off from prayer, but that's not an option. At noon, you choke down your usual pottage, sitting on a stump. The church's shadow looms, literally, since its steeple towers over the village. You overhear talk of indulgences, where the rich pay for sin forgiveness. You're too poor for that, so you're stuck praying extra hard. A quick joke: why don't peasants buy indulgences? Because their sins are all you can eat. You're not laughing, your stomach's growling, and the tithes due tomorrow. You're wondering how you'll stretch what's left of your grain. The priest's sermons call poverty holy, but you're feeling more cursed than blessed. The afternoon's no better. You're tasked with hauling a sack of barley to the church barn, a back-breaking trip across the village. The barn's bigger than your hut, stuffed with tithes while you starve. The church isn't just spiritual, it's a business, and you're the customer who can't say no. Another quirky fact: some priests sold holy water sprinkled with salt to ward off demons. You're tempted to splash some on your flea-ridden mat, but you can't afford it. You're sweating, your back screaming, and the priest's assistant is watching to make sure you don't spill any grain. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the stone church, its walls damp and cold. The priest's sermon is about obedience, warning against questioning God or him. You're kneeling, but your mind's on the tithe you can't spare. Doubt's dangerous here. A wrong word could get you labeled a heretic, and that's a one-way trip to the stake. A second joke. Why is the peasant's prayer so quiet? Because the priest's ears are louder than God's. You stifle a smirk, but the priest's glare pins you. Skipping church could cost you everything, so you bow your head and fake devotion. Back at your hut, night's falling and the fire's barely alive. Your family's silent, counting what's left of the grain. The tithe's due, and you're cutting portions smaller to make it. You eat your pottage, the taste as bleak as your mood. Every creek outside feels like the priest's men checking for hidden crops. The fleas bite, but they're nothing compared to the church's hold. Sleep's your only escape, but it's haunted by dreams of empty barns and accusing sermons. You're starting to see why the church was both comfort and cage. Its grip shaped every moment, and you're barely keeping up. The rooster's crow slices through the pre-dawn chill, yanking you from a fitful sleep on your straw mat, which feels more like a sack of frozen rocks. You're still in this grim medieval village, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the faint rot of damp straw. Your body's a knot of aches, and the fleas are relentless, treating your skin like their personal playground. You stumble outside, the icy mud sucking at your threadbare shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Winter's creeping in, and today you're facing its deadly chill, months of hunger, cold, and darkness that could break you. You're about to learn why surviving winter was a test most barely passed. You head to the fields, but there's no planting now, just salvaging what's left of the harvest. The ground's hardening, and a bitter wind cuts through your thin tunic. Historical records show winter was a killer in medieval Europe, with food stores dwindling and temperatures dropping to bone-chilling lows. You're already rationing your grain, and the thought of months with even less makes your stomach twist. Your hut's no shelter. Its leaky roof and smoky fire offer little warmth. You're shivering as you stack the last of the barley, knowing the Lord and church will take their cut first. By mid-morning, you're hauling firewood, your hands numb from the cold. The forest's nearby, but it's the Lord's, and cutting too much could land you in the stocks. A quirky tidbit. Some peasants burned dry dung to save wood, believing it kept spirits away. You're not sure about spirits, but the smell's enough to keep everyone away. Historians still argue whether this was desperation or a clever use of resources, but as you sniff the air, you're leaning toward desperation. A modern aside, imagine telling these folks about central heating. They'd think you're a king, and you trade your soul for a space heater right now. At noon, you huddle by the village fire, chewing a crust of bread so hard it could break teeth. The pottage is thinner than ever, mostly water with a hint of oats. Winter means no fresh greens, no meat unless a cow dies, and you're already dreaming of spring's weeds. Everyone's quieter, their faces pinched from cold and hunger. A quick joke. Why don't peasants love winter? Because the only thing colder than the weather is the Lord's heart. You're not laughing. Your fingers are too numb to feel the bread, and you're wondering how you'll survive until March. The afternoon spent repairing your hut's walls, smearing fresh mud to block drafts. It's futile. The wind whistles through, and the thatch roof's sagging under frost. You're burning more wood to stay warm, but the smoke's choking you, and the fire's eating through your meager pile. Another quirky fact: some believe sleeping with a live chicken kept you warm. You're tempted, but your chicken's too scrawny to share its heat. You're coughing now, the smoke and cold settling in your chest. Records suggest winter illnesses like pneumonia killed as many as famine, sometimes more. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge through the frost to the church, its stone walls colder than the air outside. The priest preaches about enduring hardship for God, but you're distracted by your chattering teeth. You're kneeling, praying for a mild winter, but the priest's glare makes you bow lower. Skipping church could mark you as lazy or worse, and you can't afford the gossip. A second joke: why is the peasant's winter prayer so long? Because he's begging for a thaw and a miracle. You stifle a smirk, but the cold's no joke. It's seeping into your bones. Back at your hut, night's fallen, and the darkness is absolute. The fire's a faint glow, barely warming the cramped space. Your family huddles under a shared blanket, faces pale and drawn. You eat your watery pottage, rationing every spoonful. The wind howls, rattling the shutters, and you're wondering if the roof will hold. The fleas are still biting, but they're nothing compared to the cold gnawing at you. Sleep's your only escape, but it's fitful, haunted by dreams of ice and empty granaries. You're starting to see why winter wasn't just a season. It was a battle, and you're barely armed for it. That rooster's crow pierces the icy dawn, dragging you from a shivering sleep on your straw mat, now stiff with frost. You're still in this miserable medieval village, the air thick with the bite of cold and the faint reek of smoldering dung fires. Your breath clouds in the dark hut, and the fleas, somehow unbothered by the chill, are still nibbling your skin. You stumble outside, the frozen mud crunching under your thin shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's lesson is brutal. Travel in the Middle Ages is a gamble with bandits, broken roads, and no GPS to save you. You're about to learn why leaving the village could be a death sentence. You're tasked with delivering a sack of grain to a neighboring manor, a half-day's trek through rough country. The Lord's orders are non-negotiable, so you sling the heavy sack over your shoulder and set out. The path's a muddy track, rutted from carts and slick with ice. Historical records show travel was rare for peasants. Most never left their village, but when it happened, it was perilous. Bandits, wolves, and weather could end you, and there's no inn or roadside diner to bail you out. You're already regretting this, and you're not even out of sight of the church steeple. By mid-morning, you're deep in the forest, the trees bare and creaking in the wind. Every snap of a twig makes you jump. Bandits are real, and they don't ask nicely for your grain. A quirky tidbit: some travelers carried pilgrim badges to show they were on holy journeys, hoping it'd deter robbers. You've got no badge, just a sack and a stick you're pretending is a weapon. Historians still argue whether these badges worked or just marked you as a target with something worth stealing. Either way, you're clutching your stick tighter, praying you look too poor to rob. Your stomach's growling, but there's no stopping for lunch. You got a crust of bread, frozen solid, and a sip of ale in a leaky flask. The cold's seeping into your bones, and the sack's rubbing your shoulder raw. A modern aside: imagine explaining Google Maps to these folks. They'd think you're a sorcerer, and you'd kill for a GPS right now. The path forks, and you're guessing which way leads to the manor. A wrong turn could mean a night in the open, and you're not built for that. A quick joke: why don't peasants travel? Because the only road trip is to the grave. You're not laughing. Your feet are numb, and the forest feels alive with threats. By afternoon, you're limping, the sack heavier with every step. A cart rumbles past, its driver eyeing you like you might steal his wheels. You're tempted, but theft means the stocks are worse. The road's a mess, half flooded from stream, and you're wading through icy water. Another quirky fact: some believe crossroads were haunted by spirits, so travelers left offerings to pass safely. You've got nothing to offer but a curse under your breath. You're starting to see why nobody leaves the village. Every mile's a roll of the dice, and you're not feeling lucky. You reach the manor by dusk, half frozen and exhausted. The bailiff takes your grain without a word, and you're sent back with nothing but a pat on the back. No food, no rest, just the same treacherous road home. Church bells are too far to hear, but you mutter a prayer anyway, hoping it counts. A second joke: why is the peasant's journey so long? Because the Lord's orders outrun his shoes. You're not smiling. Your feet are blistered, and the dark's closing in. You're alone, the forest whispering, and every shadow looks like a bandit. Back at your hut, night's fallen, and you collapse by the fire, too tired to eat. Your family's asleep, their breaths puffing in the cold air. The grain's gone, and you're empty-handed, your body screaming from the trek. The fleas are back, but they're nothing compared to the ache in your legs. Sleep's your only escape, but it's haunted by dreams of endless roads and lurking shadows. You're starting to see why travel was a last resort. Every step was a risk, and you're barely back in one piece. The rooster's crow cuts through the freezing dawn, yanking you from a restless sleep on your straw mat, now stiff with frost and crawling with fleas. You're still in this wretched medieval village, the air heavy with the sharp sting of cold and the faint reek of smoke from dying fires. Your body's a map of aches, your feet still sore from yesterday's trek, and you stumble outside, the icy mud crunching under your tattered shoes. Another day as a serf awaits, and today you're facing the unyielding wall of the social hierarchy. You're at the bottom, and there's no ladder up. Class is a trap, and you're stuck. You're about to learn why dreaming of a better life was a luxury you couldn't afford. You trudge to the fields, your hoe a familiar burden, but your eyes catch the Lord's manor on the hill. Stone walls, real windows, a world you'll never touch. You're a serf, bound to the land, and the feudal system is carved in stone. Historical records show 80 to 90% of medieval folk were peasants like you, toiling for lords who owned everything: land, crops, even your labor. You can't leave, can't marry, can't even cut firewood without permission. The Lord's knights ride by, their armor glinting, and you keep your head down. One wrong look could mean a beating. By mid-morning, you're weeding, your hands numb from the cold. You overhear gossip about a serf who tried to buy his freedom. Years of saved grain gone, and the Lord still said no. A quirky tidbit: some believed a serf could gain freedom by living in a town for a year and a day, but good luck escaping the manor's watchful eyes. Historians still argue whether these rare escapes were real or just hopeful myths that kept peasants working. You're tempted to dream of a town, but the forest's full of wolves, and you've got no coin. You're stuck, and the Lord's shadow looms large. At noon, you choke down your watery pottage, sitting on a frozen stump. The village is stratified: priests, craftsmen, and the Lord's men all rank above you. Even the miller, who cheats on flour weights, looks down on serfs. A modern aside: imagine explaining a meritocracy to these folks. They'd think it's a fairy tale, and you'd kill for a job interview right now. You're not just poor, you're invisible, your life dictated by birth. A quick joke: why don't peasants climb the social ladder? Because the Lord's boots on every rung. You're not laughing, your back screaming, and the overseer's watching for any slacking. The afternoons spent hauling manure to the fields, a job nobody wants but nobody escapes. You pass the blacksmith, who's got a warm forge and a smug grin. He's free, unlike you, and it stings. Another quirky fact: some lords force serfs to wear rough wool tunics to mark their status, like a uniform of shame. Your own tunic's itchy and torn, and you're starting to feel the weight of being less than. The hierarchy's not just rules, it's in the air, the way people avoid your eyes. Your property, not a person, and the manor court's there to remind you. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the church, its cold stone walls offering no comfort. The priest's sermon praises the divine order, saying your place is God's will. You're kneeling, but your mind's on the manor's warm hearths, off limits to you. Questioning the system could brand you a rebel or heretic, and that's a one-way trip to the stocks. A second joke: why's the peasant's dream so small? Because the Lord's castle takes up all the space. You stifle a smirk, but the priest's glare keeps you in line. Skipping church could mark you as trouble, and you're already nothing in their eyes. Back at your hut, night's fallen, and the fire's barely alive. Your family's quiet, their faces worn from the same grinding life. You eke your pottage. The taste is hopeless as your place in this world. The manor's lights glow in the distance, a reminder of what you'll never have. The fleas bite, but they're nothing compared to the weight of being born at the bottom. Sleep's your only escape, but it's haunted by dreams of stone walls and locked gates. You're starting to see why the social order was a cage, unbreakable, unforgiving, and built to keep you down. The rooster's crow claws you from a shallow sleep, your body stiff from another night on that miserable straw mat, now damp with frost and crawling with fleas. You're still trapped in this grim medieval village, the air thick with the bite of winter and the sour reek of smoke from struggling fires. Your feet ache from yesterday's endless toil, and you stumble outside, the frozen mud cracking under your worn shoes. Another day as a serf looms, and today's a heartbreaker. Childhood in the Middle Ages is no fairy tale. You're about to see why most kids didn't make it to adulthood, and the ones who did carried scars. Brace yourself, this one's rough. You head to the fields, your hoe heavy in your hands, but your eyes are on the village kids, scrawny and barefoot despite the cold. They're not playing tag or dreaming of toys. They're working, hauling water, or chasing chickens. Historical records show child mortality was brutal. Up to 50% of kids died before age 5, fell by disease, hunger, or accidents. Your own kid, if you've got one, is out there looking too small for the bucket they're carrying. You want to help, but the overseer's watching, and slacking means less food for everyone. You're already dreading the winter's toll on those little faces. By mid-morning, you're weeding, but a scream pulls you up short. A kid's fallen into the stream, and the icy water's no joke. You rush to help, pulling them out, but they're shivering, blue-lipped. There's no doctor, just a village woman with herbs who mutters about bad humors. A quirky tidbit: some believe tying a live fish to a sick child's chest could draw out fever. You're not trying that, but you're wrapping the kid in your own ragged cloak, hoping they don't sicken. Historians still argue whether such remedies were desperate folklore or held some placebo effect, but you're just praying the kid pulls through. At noon, you sit on a frozen rock, sharing your crust of bread with your kid. It's not enough, and their hollow cheeks make your chest ache. Food's scarce, and kids get the smallest portions. Adults work, so adults eat first. A modern aside: Imagine explaining pediatricians or school lunches to these folks. They'd think it's magic, and you'd kill for a juice box to give your kid. A quick joke: why don't medieval kids play games? Because hunger's the only tag they know. You're not laughing. Your kid's coughing now, and you're remembering that neighbor who died of a winter fever. The afternoon's grim. You're hauling manure, but you keep an eye on the kids, some as young as 5, working the fields or tending pigs. They're not kids for long. By 7, they're laborers. Accidents are common. A crushed foot, a burn from a fire, a fall from a cart. Another quirky fact: some parents tied bells to kids to keep track of them in the fields like livestock. You're tempted, but you've got no bells, just a sinking feeling every time your kid's out of sight. Records suggest disease wasn't the only killer. Neglect and overwork took their share, and you're starting to feel the weight of it. Church bells ring for vespers, and you trudge to the church, your kid trailing behind, shivering in a too thin tunic. The priest's sermon is about children as God's gift, but you're thinking about the ones buried behind the churchyard. You're kneeling, whispering prayers for your kid's cough to stay small, but the priest's glare makes you bow lower. Skipping church could brand you a bad parent, and gossip's a knife here. A second joke: why don't peasant kids dream big? Because the Lord's castle's the only star they see. You stifle a grimace, but the cold and fear are sinking in. Back at your hut, night's fallen, and the fire's barely aglow. Your family huddles close, your kids cough louder now. You share your watery pottage, giving them the bigger share, though it's still not enough. The wind howls, and you're wrapping them in your blanket, ignoring your own chills. The fleas bite, but they're nothing compared to the dread in your gut. Sleep's your only escape, but it's haunted by dreams of tiny graves and empty fields. You're starting to see why childhood was a gauntlet: fragile, fleeting, and far too short. The rooster's crow stabs through the icy dark, pulling you from a restless sleep on your straw mat, now a frozen, flea-ridden torture device. You're still in this wretched medieval village, the air thick with the sharp chill of winter and the faint reek of smoke clinging to your damp hut. Your body's a canvas of aches, your kid's cough echoing in your ears from last night. You stumble outside, the frost crunching under your tattered shoes, and brace for another day as a serf. Today's different, though. After weeks of grinding misery, you're seeking the one escape everyone has: sleep. You're about to learn why medieval dreams were a fleeting refuge, and even they came with a catch. You trudge to the fields, your hoe heavy, but your mind's on rest. Sleep's the only time you're free from the Lord, the church, and the endless toil. But it's not easy to come by. Your hut's cold, the straw mat's lumpy, and the fleas are relentless. Historical records show peasants got maybe 6 hours of sleep, often less in winter when they stayed up to guard dwindling fires. You're exhausted, your eyes gritty, but the overseer doesn't care. You're weeding, your hands numb, dreaming of a nap you'll never get. The fields stretch endless, and the cold bites deeper. By mid-morning, you're fighting to stay awake, the monotony of weeding blurring your vision. You overhear a neighbor talk about a dream, a feast with endless bread and ale. Dreams were big here. People believed they carried messages from God or warnings of doom. A quirky tidbit: some kept dream books to decode visions, thinking a cow in your sleep meant wealth. You dreamed of a warm bed last night, but you're pretty sure that's just your frozen feet talking. Historians still argue whether these dream interpretations were spiritual or just a way to cope with a brutal life. Either way, you're clinging to the hope of sleep tonight. At noon, you slump on a frozen stump, chewing your stale bread. Your kids nearby, their cough quieter but still there. You're too tired to worry as much, your mind drifting to last night's fleeting dream of a sunny field. Sleep's your only break, but it's not guaranteed. Last week, a storm collapsed part of your roof, and you spent the night bailing water. A modern aside, imagine telling these folks about memory foam mattresses. They'd think you're a king, and you'd trade your soul for a pillow right now. A quick joke. Why don't peasants sleep in? Because the rooster's got a vendetta. You're not laughing. Your eyelids are heavy, and the cold's making it worse. The afternoon's a slog. You're hauling firewood, each step a battle against exhaustion. The village is quiet, everyone worn down by winter and work. Sleep's a shared obsession. You overhear women swapping remedies for insomnia. Herbs, warm ale, even chanting prayers backward. Another quirky fact. Some believe sleeping with a stone under your head brought good dreams. You're tempted to try it, but your mat's hard enough. Records suggest sleep deprivation was common, weakening bodies already battered by hunger and cold. You're yawning, but the overseer's glare keeps you moving. Church bells ring for vespers, and you shuffle to the church. Its icy walls no comfort. The priest's sermon drones about eternal rest, and you're half asleep on your knees, dreaming of a warm blanket. Questioning the sermon could mark you as trouble, so you bow lower, eyes half closed. A second joke. Why is the peasant's nap so short? Because the Lord taxes dreams too. You stifle a smirk, but the cold stone floor snaps you awake. Skipping church could mean gossip, and you're too tired for more trouble. Back at your hut, night's fallen, and the fire's a faint flicker. Your family huddles close, your kids cough softer now. You share the last of the watery pottage, your hands trembling from cold and fatigue. The wind howls, but you're too exhausted to care. You collapse onto your straw mat, the fleas buzzing, and pull the thin blanket tight. Sleep's your only refuge, a fragile moment where the Lord, the church, and the winter can't touch you. Your eyes close, and the world fades. Mud, hunger, fear slipping away. The village quiets, its sounds softening to a distant hum. You're drifting, carried to a place where fields are green, bread is warm, and no one's watching. The cold recedes, your breath slow, and for now, you're free, wrapped in the gentle pull of dreams. Let the darkness hold you, soft and steady, like a river carrying you home. The village is gone, its weight lifted, and all that's left is peace, whispering you to rest. Sleep now, safe